Hello, everybody. Welcome. If you folks are able to turn your cameras on, we would love to see you. We also understand that some of you may not be able to turn your cameras on, and that's perfectly fine. Welcome back to Making Connections, a series on the loneliness epidemic. My name is Andy Engel, and I lead virtual public programs here at Reimagine. We began this series this past spring, at the suggestion of our host, Allison Gilbert, and I'll introduce her shortly. Since this series is all about making connections, please start using our chat and tell us where you are and what drew you to this program. First, just a few words about Reimagine. We are a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, different ages, different races, different faiths, people of no faith, all coming together to heal ourselves, our communities, and the world. We support each other by facing adversity, loss, and mortality, and transforming life's challenges into growth and action. Reimagine resources, support groups, events like this one today are free, sliding scale, and accessible. This is made possible by the support and generosity of participants like you. So for those of you who already made a tax-deductible donation when you registered for today's program, thank you. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform the hard stuff into purpose and action. We have 3 sessions of Making Connections for you this fall, all focused on a particular theme. Last month, we had actor Alicia Reiner, author V, you may know her as Eve Ensler, and entrepreneur and activist Rachel Cargill. All 3 are advocates and activists who shared how acts of service and civic engagement are critical to reduce social isolation, to build community, and to improve our well-being. And if you couldn't be there live, we'll paste the link to the recording in the chat. My colleague Trina Williams is helping out today. Thank you, Trina. You'll also receive a link to the recording of today's discussion in your inbox, along with other resources. One excellent resource is the Foundation for Social Connection, one of our co-hosts for this series. Also, please check out the work of Social Prescribing USA, another one of our co-hosts. Just a few words about Zoom before we begin. I want to make sure you know that the CC button at the bottom of your screen will enable captions. Feel free to send me or Trina a note in the chat if you're having any problems technically during this event. We'll try to help you out. And now, a few words about Allison Gilbert. Allison is a longtime Reimagine collaborator and host. She is a journalist and writer. She's the author of numerous books, including The Joy of Connections, 100 Ways to Beat Loneliness and Live a Happier and More Meaningful Life. It's co-authored with the late, great Dr. Ruth Westheimer. Back in the spring, as part of this series, we were blessed to include an interview with Dr. Ruth that Allison conducted before her death. May her memory be a blessing. You can follow Allison on social. She's everywhere as A. Gilbert Writer. And now please welcome Allison Gilbert, who will introduce our very special guests.
Thank you so much, Andy. This is always my favorite time of the month. It must be the Making Connections time. So thank you everyone for carving out time in your busy day to join us. We are in for a treat today. The 3 guests that I have invited to be with you are experts in thinking about social connection, thinking about how to eradicate loneliness, but through a lens that I don't think gets enough attention, which is at work, and why workplace connections are actually really important to our overall wellness, our mental health, our well-being. And so I'm really happy to join you today. I must say something right off the top. I may be to you in a new place. If you join us all the time from the Making Connections series, or before that, the Past and Present series, I don't look like I'm in a familiar place. And I want to let you in a little secret. So I'm traveling for work this week. I live in New York, but I'm coming to you right now from LA. But where am I? This is a really important part of our discussion to begin with. I could have chosen to stay in hotels while I'm in LA. But you know what I did to forge more meaningful connections? I have work friends who have become real friends. And so instead of staying in a hotel, yes, save money. Who doesn't want to save money? But why not knock on my LA friends and coworkers' doors and stay with them? So I'm coming to you from one of those work friends that I have, and I love it. And we actually met through work, and I've never stayed in her house before, and this is a real treat. So I'm starting there because I had to make the decision to make a choice. Let's use my work trip to build and nurture connections. So, with that in mind, I want to start with Eddie Garcia, if that is okay. You are the founder of the Foundation for Social Connection. And the first question is really a softball. Why should we care about loneliness at work? Loneliness is maybe more heard of perhaps in our personal lives. And work is work, right? We go there, we do the work, we make money, we go home. Why should we care about our hearts in the workplace? And do you think that loneliness is a problem in the workplace?
Yeah, thanks, Allison. First, I'll start by saying thank you for having me, and I'm really pleased to be on such an esteemed panel of speakers. Absolutely, of course, we should care about loneliness in the workplace. As many of us feel, it's very hard to separate our personal lives from our workspaces, right? As much as corporate America tells us to do that, like leave yourself at home, it's nearly impossible. So at the workspace, there's all kinds of research to show that loneliness or social isolation in the workspace reduces economic outputs for corporations, right? So thinking about that side of it, Cigna did a large study looking at over $400 billion in lost productivity, healthcare costs, and more, and lower productivity. But there's also tremendous health outcomes, right? We've talked about in other settings of care as well. For us as individuals, our sense of meaning, our sense of purpose is impacted by loneliness in the workplace. A lot of us derive our sense of purpose from our jobs and what we're working on. And the ability to foster networks and to feel included and belonging within the workplace impacts our mental health and our ability to produce our best selves in the workplace.
So this is very interesting. So there's one stat I would like to share, and then I want to ask you one follow-up question. Then, of course, I'm bringing in Susan and Ann to this conversation. So here's a statistic. 84% of respondents to a survey that the Surgeon General cited said their workplace conditions had contributed to at least one mental health challenge that, of course, they think about and live with when they're not at work. And the Surgeon General released a framework for workplace mental health and well-being. It's a 30-page document that you can download. We're going to put up the link. And it really explores for all of us how companies can make the workplace a little bit more friendly to connections. But you have something too from the Foundation for Social Connection, an action guide for building socially connected communities. And my question is, there are a lot of stakeholders involved in your work, and I'm wondering how receptive corporations are in that framework of how you're trying to solve for this loneliness epidemic.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. More corporations need to be more involved in this work. I'll say that. There's lots of research that shows that more socially connected work environments lead to a 56% increase in work productivity. They reduce job turnover by 50%, reduce sick days by 75%, and more and more and more. And I love how you tee this up about the quality of the workspace, contributing to lower mental health. That's not just around the structural build of our offices and how we interact. That is one for sure. Are there communal places for gathering? Are there not? But it's also around the work culture. So there's research looking at allowing employees to have autonomy also builds ability for them to build their own networks and to solution on their own. That builds stronger connection. Also, do we respect people's time away from work? So when you're on vacation, be on vacation, right? And allowing yourselves to build connections outside of work so you can bring your full self into this. So I would say that the case needs to be made with more corporations to get involved in this space. And we've got the data to show how it supports their bottom line.
So, Susan, the bottom line for how to make this go from a broad conversation and whittle it down to the micro, you've written about this. You are the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies. You are a communications consultant, but you're also, as your kind of fun way of going through the world, you are a serial connector, and you wrote a book that I, by the way, love, and everyone should buy a copy of right now. It is dense, but really worth the read. It is actionable. It's called The Lost Art of Connecting. So when I say micro, it comes down to this: how do you make the workplace more friendly? And you have a single question that you should ask. I'm going to tee it up. I hope you know where I'm going, but there's one question that you have to ask when you're going into these conversations. I hope I teed it up okay for you.
How can I help?
Yes, yes.
Like, oh my God, do I remember? But yes, and my contention, and one of the reasons the book is called The Lost Art of Connecting and not The Lost Art of Networking, is I believe as we go about our daily lives, which of course in many cases is made up of work, is flipping the switch on networking where, look, we all have to network, I get it. But when we were taught to network, it was all about what can we get? What can we walk away with? What can this person, my colleague, do to help me? And my recommendation is let's tip that 180 degrees. Instead, lead with how can I be helpful to my friend, to my colleague, to my community member, to my office mate. And in doing so, we appear more human, we are more human, and then we open space to help others to come back and allow them to be themselves.
In your book, The Lost Art of Connecting, here is what I loved, because it's so shockingly and wonderfully, it reminds me of the book that Dr. Ruth and I just wrote together, The Joy of Connections. And here's how. You talk about what's really essential, your relationship with yourself. Can you explain this when it comes to connections at work? I thought this is one of those aha moments, and Ann, I am bringing you in next. Do not go away. So this relationship with yourself, in The Joy of Connections, Dr. Ruth, the biggest component, there are 5 parts in Dr. Ruth's menu for connection. The biggest one is self, your relationship with your own sense of how you move through the world personally and at work. So help us understand that.
I will, but first I just have to say thank you. You are the most remarkable moderator I think I have ever had the pleasure of being in one of these 4 or 5 or 6 boxes virtually. And I can't wait to be able to do this with you personally. Thank you, Allison. You're a treasure and a joy. If we
I
can't,
hope we're recording. No.
we can rewind.
I'm kidding.
No, we can't help others if we don't know how we can be helpful. And my contention and many of our contentions is we have to look inside ourselves to find ways and think about our superpowers. And oftentimes at work and at play, we tend to not feel like we can be helpful because we feel insecure and all this. But my contention, and I think we all agree, we all have superpowers. We all have ways to be helpful. And doing that kind of self-audit before clocking in at work or showing up at an event or, getting online and communicating in a community like this helps us be supportive of others. And I have to believe that this world that we all live in and inhabit would be a better place if we were more helpful to one another and thought about ways we could be helpful.
So Ann Shoket lives this life. I have actually been, in full transparency, the beneficiary of Ann's willingness to be helpful. It is a gift and it keeps on giving. There's a domino effect to what we are talking about. Uh, Anne, you have a company called New Power Media, which acquired a membership organization called The List about 4 years ago. So you're on the front lines of connecting and hearing from women leaders, binary leaders, of what they are needing these days. And you've taken on the loneliness epidemic with work called 10 Minutes to Togetherness. Was this because you were listening and you were hearing over and over again that people were really fractured and in silos and feeling othered? How did you come to take on this when you have talked about millennials in the workplace and you've talked about parenting in the workplace, but now you're really point forward on this topic, and help us understand that?
So, thank you. I'm late to this conversation about loneliness and togetherness. Yes, it's been in the ether, and the through line of my career has always been, how do I help women step into their power in their lives and in their careers? I was editor-in-chief of 17 magazine, and then I wrote a book called The Big Life for Millennials into the Next Phase of Their Life. And this community that I own and run now, The List, is sort of senior level women. And when I first started to hear about this loneliness epidemic, I was like, I'm not lonely. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not lonely. But I really, like, it got my journalism, my old school journalism spidey senses. And I was like, what is this loneliness? What's happening? And as soon as I started to really explore the ways that loneliness manifests itself, particularly for women, that it's not, there's not something wrong with you, right? It's that you feel isolated and overwhelmed and unsupported in the workplace. And I started to realize, oh my God, that every time in my own career that I had moved into a position of greater responsibility, right? When I became editor-in-chief of 17, I was single. I was the youngest editor-in-chief of a major magazine at the time. I was living alone. I didn't have a dog. I didn't have a cat. And I would come home just without knowing. And by the way, it was deeply competitive, sharp elbows everywhere. And there was no one I could turn to say, like, am I doing this right? Is this okay? Or there's this weird thing happening. How do you help? How can I help? Nobody. I did not know Susan McPherson then. I didn't get to meet Susan until much later, but there was nobody saying to me, how can I help you? And I realized I started to connect the dots through to this amazing community that I run now, that the reason we come together, 500 women across the country, 500 women and non-binary leaders, is because we don't have anybody else to turn to. There is nobody else except for Susan, bless you, but there's nobody else saying, how can I help you? Everybody's looking to us for the answers. Everyone wants us to have magically, like, figured it all out. And it's deeply lonely. One of the really important things, I just want to back to what Eddie said at the very beginning, when we think about the impact of loneliness in the workplace. So my lens on this is with women. And we did some research, and I saw that my researcher is in the chat here as well, but we did this research that shows that the more senior women get in their careers, the lonelier they get. They get more isolated, more overwhelmed, more lack of support. And this is not a men versus women issue, but it turns out that men feel more supported and more seen and less disconnected the more senior they get. So the loneliness is a really important part of the glass ceiling, right? That is, it is keeping women from moving into positions of greater power and influence. And that's where my particular lens on this issue and my interest really lies, in helping women step into their power.
Well, what I learned from you, Anne, I interviewed Anne with Dr. Ruth Westheimer for The Joy of Connections. And just to put a little bit of a sharper pencil to what Anne's talking about why this kind of feels so isolating at work the higher you go up on the food chain, is because there's competition for limited resources, right? There's competition for limited promotions. And so if that's the case where you are, it's going to feel really weird for all of us to say, go make friends because you could feel like you're in competition with that person down the hall or on the other side of the Zoom call. And so, one of the concrete ways of forging connection that Anne, you taught me and that we included in the book is think about those organizations that are affiliate groups or affiliation groups outside of your company, but related to your industry. And that is a way of kind of giving yourself some scaffolding that really may be helpful. Eddie, are there concrete, let's go from something wide to something narrow. Give us a tip, a strategy that you have seen in your own work or perhaps amongst your colleagues, because not only, by the way, are you the founder of the Foundation for Social Connection. I put on my glasses because this one is a big doozy. You are co-chair of the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection. So maybe even share with us some concrete lessons. What are they doing better than we are in the United States? What's happening that we can really put into some concrete use?
I really appreciate the question, Allison. If I could just respond to Anne really quickly and then come back to this. And what you tapped into was actually a huge function of social connection is looking at, do we have relationships? Do we have the types of relationships that meet all the various needs that we have as a human? And then are they of high quality, right? Those relationships. So I think you were talking really about as you're moving up that career ladder, do you have functional relationships that are meeting your needs as you're going up? And those become smaller and smaller and smaller pools of people that can meet your needs. So we do need to build that out to think about our functionalities and relationships. So just wanted to comment on that. From the global perspective, Alison, thanks for teeing it up.
By the
Absolutely.
way, can I just say one thing? You guys have to stop what you're doing right now and just pay attention to what Eddie did in a workplace. He told Anne that he was listening to her. Then he was able to articulate back to her what he think that he actually digested, validating that Anne is a critical part of this conversation. That to me is like a secret sauce of how we can go through our workday, listen, take note, and then add and then amplify. Maybe don't just talk all the time. Absorb that your colleagues are actually bringing incredible value to the table. So just shout out to Eddie. You just led by example here. Okay, now back to you.
Okay, great. Allison, you really are the best moderator I've ever seen. Thank you for that. So more globally, I think that it's around culture of work. So, I mean, I think we can all agree the pace at which we move in the United States is backbreaking. The need for speed and efficiency actually removes human abrasion along the way. And so in order for us to be more efficient, we need to have less connection, less interaction with humans. And that's a culture of the work environment in the United States. That's not the case necessarily in other parts of the globe, where they value time off, where they value peer-to-peer connections and mentoring within the workplace, where they have ability for growth and cultures of sophisticated cultures around mentoring and growth within your skill sets. There's also, a lot of thinking around how they learn across sectors in other parts of the world. There's many strategies that we can bring into the United States, and I think the foundation's really trying to do that, along with great people here too.
I love that. And by the way, of course, we can't get through all that Eddie is talking about or Anne or Susan today, but a brief moment to pause just so you guys can stay in touch with Eddie and Susan and Anne after we are off this call today. Get your questions ready. This is your time. We're going to be done here at the top of the hour. So don't kick yourself when we're off this call and you wish that you could have asked Ann a question or Susan or Eddie. This is your time. But just to let you know, there are ways of staying engaged. So I'm going to look at my paper so I don't get anything wrong. So Ann, on Instagram, you're Ann Shoket. On X, you're Ann Shoket. That's easy. On Facebook, you're Ann.Shoket. Don't get that wrong, you guys. And we mentioned very briefly, we're going to come back and talk to Ann more about this. There's 10, the number 10 minutes to togetherness.com. We're going to get to that. But also, Ann, you have your own website, just your name.com. And then Susan, you are everywhere, it seems. Susan MCP for McPherson, Susan MCP1 on
That's because
Instagram.
there was another Susan McPherson.
Well, how dare
Back
yeah.
in 2007.
On X, it's Susan MCP1, and on Facebook, Susan McPherson. You got that one. And you're at susanmcp.com and then MCP Strategies for McPhersonstrategies.com. Eddie, last but not least, Instagram. The Foundation for Social Connection is FDN4, the number 4 social connection. On X, FDN4 social connection. And on Facebook, it's a little different, Foundation for Social Connection. Okay, Susan, you have some more specifics from your book that I do want to talk about while everyone is getting their questions ready, right? We're going to come to your questions soon. But one thing also is about being vulnerable. And to me, this is surprising because I think at work we wear armor and we want to appear to those who work with us, or maybe we want to work for, maybe it's a client that we're hoping to get, right? Maybe we're in sales. Being vulnerable, how does that help us at work? Because it seems a little bit scary to admit when things aren't quite going the way you want it to go. How does that come into play?
Well, first of all, not everything, I mean, most things don't go the way you expect them or want them. I mean, I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but like reality, right? I founded my company at age 48. And one of the reasons I chose this route was exactly what Ann was describing. I was moving up the chain and I was getting really lonely. And I was getting shut out because of the, proverbial glass ceiling. And, we're talking at a time, and I'm hoping we're moving out of this where one woman got through, but then shut the door behind her kind of thing. But when I started my company, one of the ethos that I was building the company was based on connection, compassion, kindness, care, and listening. Now, when you put all those together, it has to be vulnerable, right? You can't build connections if you put an armor around who you really are. And I've seen firsthand when at the top of an organization, if you are vulnerable, others feel more vulnerable. Now,
Susan, can you give us a concrete example? What does that mean? You're being vulnerable to say what? Like, what does that look like in practice? Give us an example.
When the pandemic was starting, okay, I was terrified. Okay, I had 15 employees. I didn't know if business were a consulting firm, social impact consulting firm. I didn't know if in 3 months we would still have any business. I was terrified. I could have come to that first meeting, second meeting, third meeting and be like, oh, it's going to be fine. Instead, I opened up and I burst into tears. Okay. I can guarantee that the team that was looking at me in the 15 boxes was also feeling very scared. But many of them in their 20s and their 30s probably didn't have the guts at that point in their lives to also share their concern. But because of that, people stood up. When George Floyd was murdered, okay, we had a very healthy discussion. And I admitted, I'm a white woman of privilege. I'm not the person who should be talking about this. And that helped create a vibrant conversation where the people of color in my team could speak up and not feel like they shouldn't. So to me, by sharing, and again, I'm not trying to make this about me, but all of us at the tops of organizations, people who hold power, if we don't set the example to be more vulnerable, we never can expect everyone else in the organization to even attempt to be. And again, to backtrack, the reason being vulnerable helps is when you are your true self, or at least as much of a true self we can be in the workplace. I'm not suggesting you know, open the kimono and share all your deep, dark circuit secrets, but to at least be present and be there and be you, you need to kind of just be a little bit more open.
I think otherwise we all become like that greased watermelon when we were kids and you're kind of passing the greased watermelon. It kind of just slips through your fingers. Like people don't become real. You can't latch on. They're not solid relationships. Something about vulnerability and authenticity allows us to like catch something meaty that you
I
can then go further with, right?
completely agree. My caution is, never say bring your full self to work, because some people don't feel safe bringing their full selves to work and have good reason to feel that way. So unless you are going to do what you can to help people feel comfortable, to help people feel like they belong. And, we talked about listening to people twice as much as you talk to them, right? Like setting up this kind of, for lack of better terms, like feeling of comfort and safety is vitally important to have people be vulnerable, people feel like they can connect, people feel less lonely, and people feel like that they have folks, colleagues that they can go to. So I'll stop. I don't want to take up too much space.
No, I appreciate that. I want to go back to Anne and then we're going to bring in your questions. So, this is your invitation again to think about what you want to ask Susan, Eddie, me, Anne. Now's your chance to kind of get those thoughts together. I'm going to ask Anne one more question before we do, so you still have time. But then I really want you to use this time because you signed up for this Zoom for a reason. There was something that piqued your interest. And so if you get off this Zoom at the top of the hour and you wish, oh, I should have asked this question, I don't want you to kick yourself. I want you to have that moment now, as soon as I'm done asking Anne this next question. Let's talk about your work at TheLi.st. You're the CEO, as I've described before. You could change anything about your work. You can dive into many different initiatives, but you have chosen 10 minutes to togetherness. You didn't do it alone. You were in collaboration and partnership. What is it? What did you learn? What do we need to know?
Thank you. I when I ask myself this question, what are we here for? Right? What are we doing here collectively? These are a community of people from across the country, different industries. What we are here for is togetherness. We are here to support and make introductions and to validate and to offer our own points of view. And when I think about the light I want to shine in the world, I want to offer that to more than just the 500 humans who are in my community. I want everyone to have their own list, right? For everyone to have their own source of support. And so 10 minutes to togetherness is an initiative to teach everyone how to build their community without putting on shoes, without putting on Spanx. I got rid of my Spanx during the pandemic. No Spanx, no shoes. You do not even have to get off the couch. It is literally so simple. You don't even have to meet anybody new. That's the best part, is that you just reach out and connect to people you already know on a regular cadence, 10 minutes a day. Just like Susan said, Susan is one of our advisors on this program. Just like Susan said, I've been thinking of you. You've been on my mind. How are you? Remember that thing we were talking about? How can I help? I think that that is such a valuable way to keep, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to reach out to the same person for 10 minutes a day, but our beloved Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, in his report showed that we'd had this huge 20-year decline in time spent together. But if we all spent 10 minutes a day intentionally building our networks, we decrease that loneliness gap by 50%. So it's so simple. I do mine in the morning. I get a cup of coffee. I turn on my computer. Good Morning America is playing in the background. And I think about who's been on my mind. Who have I not been in touch with? Who have I not heard from? Who did we let a thread drop? and I reach out to them. And that's like so simple. I'm actually going to start to do them on Instagram. I'm going to start to do them live so people can join along and we can do it together, because sometimes you need a little like extra support to get your 10 minutes going and to make it a habit. But that's it. It's a way to teach people. We call it the magic of the list, the power of the list, right? But I want that power to shine for more than just the 500 people in our community. I want that to be 5,000, 50,000, 5 million. Like, we want everyone to build their network of support.
I love that initiative so much, but just to bring it back just a little bit, it doesn't have to be a text. Maybe you're not in text contact with your work colleagues. Susan, what I love so much about your book, The Lost Art of Connecting, you talk so lovingly about your mom and your dad and how they just used to cut articles all the time and mail them out in the snail mail because they were thinking so much about people in their lives. And you can do that today digitally. There's an article that you have seen, there's a video you have seen. You can forward that to a colleague and just say that you were thinking of them. And so that's something, Susan, you talk about it as an analog idea that your parents did. That's something that we can all take into the digital age too, I think. So that was just one of the pieces of your book, Susan, that I love so much. But Andy, let me bring in those who are here, who want to be heard. They have questions. Can you tell us what some of those questions are?
Sure. I'll start with Hanson's question. It was the first one that came in. What is working in terms of having conversations with leaders that we need to partner with on this journey to bring more intentional connection to the workplace? What isn't working?
Eddie, can you answer that?
I'm happy to take a stab and let others jump in too. Um, I think a lot of leaders are struggling right now with remote work versus in-person work, and what to do about that. We've seen all sorts of surveys say that certain populations appreciate the in-person interactions, other populations don't. And how do they reconcile those things? And what we've seen most useful is to really go to your source, go to your employees, have conversations with them about that, find middle ground around these approaches, and recognize that a single solution is not going to solve for everyone. And so having flexibility within those approaches. So I guess overarchingly, I think it's around ensuring that you're in dialogue with the community you're serving, the leadership, and their employees, and having those feedback loops.
Thank you. Hanson Hunt, thank you for that great question. I really appreciate it. We need to catch up, by the way, offline. Andy, any other questions?
Eddie just touched on remote work. Julie had a question. How has the remote work environment impacted loneliness? And related to that, Ann had a question. How about those who are in the freelancer gig economy, which is a growing section of the working population, some by choice, some by corporations who prefer to use contractors because they don't have to give them as much benefits?
I'll start and just say that that entire subject is highly under-researched. It's something that we're advocating really strongly, that additional research take place, especially in the gig economy, on how do we solution for social connection for that sector of society. So more to come. Would love to find funders to help fund that research.
Anne, can we toss it to you and then Susan?
Yeah, I want to jump in on the part of the question about remote work and about how we create a culture of connection in the workplace. In our research, we found that there were 30% of employees who we called the cultivators. And these are the people who do 100% of the work of connecting people in the workplace. They walk around the office, they set up Zooms, they have coffee meetings, they will have collaborative, everybody knows the cultivators who are in their office. But the really important piece was the work that the way the company was set up, that it's collaborative work projects, that it's visibility into what other departments are doing. And that is not necessarily something that disappears when you have remote workers, right? That the idea of collaboration, the idea of visibility and acknowledgement. And it turns out, so here's the one thing that is great for remote workers, that it turns out that it is the all hands meeting that is the like secret sauce of creating connection in the workplace. And I know it sounds like everybody's like, ugh, the all hands meeting, but it is a regular ritual, a moment set aside by the company that shows that they matter, that shows that you're giving visibility and acknowledgement to your employees, giving a chance to have collaboration and connection among people. So, it's not because you're remote, you're not necessarily disconnected from the things that will make you feel that will feed you on the inside. And for freelancers, I think that that's a little bit harder because you are disconnected, right? You're not in the group. And that's where I always suggest that you find an outside community, a regular group of people who are either freelancers like you or who are in a similar life stage, where you can promise to have each other's back. You only need a few people.
Susan.
Several things. One, volunteer. Joining communities is absolutely amazing, but I saw a question where somebody asked about their 27-year-old daughter. In the arc of my career, I moved around probably 7 or 8 times, and every time I would move to a new city and I didn't know anyone, I would get involved in local civic organizations, which would provide me new skills that I could then use on the job, but also help me meet people who were not like me. Because one of the biggest and most important contentions we all need to be thinking about is how do we break out of that hermetically sealed bubble that so many of us live in, myself included, where we tend to attract people that look like us, sound like us, the same age, race, and color as us. In terms of did the pandemic affect loneliness and lack of connection? Obviously, it had put huge strains on all of us. The solution is not forcing people back to work at their offices. We see a lot of companies now, and I'm not going to call out names because you may work for one of them, but this notion of just putting people artificially together is going to force productivity connection because productivity did not go down according to the studies. So what will help is what Ann and Eddie, and Allison have been talking about is bringing people together around joy, around innovation, around moments where you can spark people's most creative thinking. And then making sure the people who have the power encourage and make connecting part of the bottom line, like make it part of job functions, right? Eddie, you said right at the beginning that studies show that people are more productive when they have friends at work. And I cited many examples of that in my book, but this notion that we all have to physically be together is something from when the traditional workplace started in the 40s and 50s.
There's something that the US Surgeon General has talked about publicly, and so I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think it's so lovely that this conversation has reminded me, and I think it's so elegant. So when he has an office, he runs an office, the Office of the Surgeon General. And when he has all staff meetings, and I might be getting this a little bit wrong, but the gist is really on target. He has one of his employees interview another employee about what they did when they were growing up. Where did they grow up? What did they enjoy when they were growing up? This isn't an all hands meeting. This is how he begins. I think he calls it like humans of the Office of the Surgeon General or something like this. And it's a way for those who are online and not in the office and those who are in the office to connect with each other on a human level. So what's off the table in that moment is work-related questions. It's just about being human, but that takes proactivity from the top to crack open moments for those types of connections. And so there's one thing I wanted to mention, Eddie, that I found deep on your website, but I'm wondering if you can talk about it. So I'm putting you a little bit on the spot. There's something called the Building H Index, and it demands, I'm going to read this because it was new to me, so I'm happy to share it with everybody. It demands more accountability from companies that impact consumers' health. So it ranked 76 consumer products from Uber to Netflix based on how they impact the health of customers and consumers. So there seems to be a growing onus that we're putting on companies to recognize this as an opportunity to bring us more together. Can you talk about this just a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's an amazing effort to look at the outputs of corporations, of both their products and their internal workings. We've worked really closely with them in 2024 to also include social engagement as a metric of what outputs of organizations have an impact on. I think it's the exact right way to go. If we're going to move the mark on both increasing a culture of connection across the workforce and the work world, we also need to think about what our outputs are having as an impact as well. So it's something that we're really closely connected with and hoping to continue to build out.
So this is so interesting. So Susan, in your work at McPherson Strategies, I know you're a B Corp. And so B Corps spend a lot of time thinking about how that company is in relationship to others, to the world around them. But the metrics, as far as I know, they're financial or they're environmental. And I'm wondering about metrics related to connectivity in the office. Has that shown up at all?
I did the old like stupid move of being on mute. No, it doesn't right now. And I know that because we are in the process of re-upping our B Corp certification. And it is a very rigorous and painstaking process. But unfortunately, there's nothing in there about connecting employees. But I think you have a family member that is somewhere involved in the B Corp world. So you may want to suggest that to him.
I wasn't going to say that, but maybe I shall have a conversation over Thanksgiving about that. Very interesting. Excellent.
One
So,
thing
Ann,
important
yeah.
though about is attracting and retaining a diverse workforce is vitally important. So I do think that there are intersections around what we've been talking about in ways that maybe aren't defined what we would normally think of as connecting.
And I have a question for you. When you wrote The Big Life, if you were to go back and do a new version, would you lean more heavily on this type of conversation as one key ingredient to living the big life?
Oh, she's on mute too.
Did it again. Um, it's so interesting. The Big Life was actually one of the first like layers of the onion that I was peeling in connection. And I wrote the book shortly after I had left a really traditional hierarchical, big, tall skyscraper tower corporate media job. And the first thing I did was join a co-working space so that I could, and it was like brand new co-work. Oh, what is this? There's people around. And the second thing I did was to invite people over to my house for dinner. And I did 24 dinners in order to write The Big Life. And I would bring together people who were already friends, a friend of a friend of a friend. And I would see them around my table. I didn't know them, the way that they supported each other and connected with each other and cheerleaded for each other. And that to me was the beginning of, I mean, I did a TED talk called We Should All Be More Millennial, but I actually think that's what I learned from millennial women is the ways in which they had peer support. Nobody was talking about mentorship or sponsorship. They were all talking about how can we help each other get along. And I came up in the corporate world of like every man for himself, never let him see you sweat, right? And sharp elbows. And to see the way that this next generation of young women, although are they the next generation now? These are just regular grown-up women with big senior jobs. But to see the way they fully stepped into their big lives and have really carried forward the connection of peer support, I would just continue to like amplify how a small group of support, intimate, deep, meaningful connections with people who are not necessarily your friends, right? You just want to like drink wine with your friends and talk about gossip, right? These are people who are like intentionally together to help support you. So if I revisited the women in my book now, gosh, I would love to I would love to have pizza and rosé with them again. That was what we served at our dinners, but I'm sure that they are still having pizza and rosé with each other.
I want to address a frustration before anyone has a chance to express it after this Zoom. This all sounds great, but it also feels hard. And I fear that we're going to leave people without an actionable way to put this into use. So let me put us on the spot of doing a quick round robin of practical tips. You get off this Zoom in 9 minutes. What is something that we can do immediately? Well, maybe go for a cup of coffee or get a glass of water or use the bathroom, but almost immediately. What can you do right away today to build a meaningful connection at work? Susan, give us some lightning round ideas.
I did it again. I would use whatever means you have at work, whether it keeps telling me I'm still muted. Sorry.
No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
I was like, am I muted? Does anybody hear me? Whatever mode of communications your company uses, whether it's Slack, email, WhatsApp, reach out to 3 people you've never met at the company and don't ask them for their help. Don't ask them to meet with you. Just let them know that you discovered them, you found them on the corporate internet, and you'd love to learn more about them. That's it.
Love
That's
that.
something you can do right when you hang up.
I love that. Eddie, can you give us maybe 1 or 2 hot takes?
Yeah, I'm going to build off of that actually, and I've been trying to weave this into some answer, so I'm glad it's coming up. Intergenerational impacts are huge in the social connection. So I would say, building off of Susan's comment, find someone of a different age band than you, learn from them, reach out to them right away, and see what you can give in service and what you can take away from that. I think that's a big one. And then start a peer-to-peer movement within your corporation or your job, whatever it is.
But that may not be something you can do right this second.
Not right this second, but you can absolutely have conversations right away of interest of others that you work with to start a peer-to-peer group for support.
Can I just speak to the intergenerational thing? I think there's an assumption that it's the older, more experienced people that can give more guidance to the younger people, and that couldn't be more true. And so when younger people say to me, Susan, I'm junior, how am I? I'm like, just walk up to a person who's 55 and older and say 2 words, TikTok, and you might get them interested. In other words, it's not, we all have superpowers, no matter if we're 12 or 75. I'm sorry, Ann, I took up your.
I love that. Ann, your turn.
I do want to say that when Susan and I first met, we were in a community together, and she did that. She pinged me and she said, "I would love to get to know you. Can we have coffee together?" And that's how we first met. So that was really, she walks her talk. You don't even have to leave your desk to do the thing I'm going to suggest. I want you to ping somebody who you used to work with. Because keeping in touch with either a former boss or a former employee or someone who's 3 jobs ago who was like, your work pal, and just say, hey, that literally, these are the words. Hey, you've been on my mind. How are you? ? And that's it. And then you will have opened the door to keep the relationship warm. That's it. And then do it again tomorrow.
I love that. I love it. I love it. I want to share just one quick thing, just really quick, and then Susan, I'm going to circle back to you, because I think I just saw you raise your hand that you wanted to add something. So I'm on this book tour promoting Dr. Ruth's incredible book, The Joy of Connections. It's really hard to promote a book without our superstar. It's an unenviable position to be in, but I'm doing my best in her honor to take her book over the finish line. She needs this book. She deserves this book to be a success. And one thing that I am really enjoying, I have to admit, and it's perfect for this conversation. So before I go into any interview situation, it's likely that I know other people who work inside that building. And it's a wonderful opportunity for me before I go in the days leading up to that interview, whether it's in radio or TV or at a newspaper, to reach out to all those people who work in that building and say, hey, I haven't seen you in so long. We haven't spoken in years, but I happen to be in your building tomorrow or today, 10 o'clock. Are you able just to say a quick hello? It's just a really nice touch point for me that I've been experiencing. Susan, you were about to say something.
I mean, we get down on social media, but that's a perfect example when you are flying or visiting a new city, or, you know, traveling on business travel, to put out a call and say, I'm going to be in town. I don't know if you can find the people in that building, but regardless. No, now I don't know if I can remember what I was going to say. Oh, yes, Anne brought up this notion about reaching out to a dormant contact. And I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and said, oh, I'm really afraid if I reach out to somebody I've lost touch with, you know, they may never respond. And I always say, yeah, but at least you tried. And all of us have dormant relationships that, for whatever reason, and I still to this day use the pandemic as an excuse. I probably can't keep doing that, but the notion is be the better person. Put it out there. I realize it's scary and you may not get the response you want, but you tried.
Someone has to make the first move, right?
Exactly.
Someone has to take risks. Andy, before I bring it back to you, maybe there's one quick question we can do in the next 3 minutes, but just really quickly, for Ann Shoket, do not lose track of us. Stay in touch. Ann is at annshoket.com and 10minutes2togetherness.com. Susan McPherson has other websites too. Ann has two. Susan has two. SusanMCP.com. And of course, your company, McPherson Strategies, is also available online, mcpstrategies.com. And Eddie, I have not forgotten about you, of course. Foundation for Social Connection. Is that the website, or did I get that wrong? Is that right?
It's social-connection.org.
Oh my gosh. See, there you go. I'm so glad I asked you that question. Andy, back to you. Is there time for a question before we wrap things up? A quickie. Oh, you're muted, Andy. I can't believe it. You're the co-host and you're muted.
Well, I'm just following what everyone else was doing. Well, this is not really a quickie, but I feel it's an important question. There are two related questions to DEI. Can you speak to the relationship between the work of DEI and workplace loneliness? And another related one, what do you recommend for those who can't do? For those who it's not so easy to remember, it's not so easy to follow up with any degree of consistency, whether that's due to neurodivergence, someone's disability.
I think you're right. Those are very tender questions that are deserving of greater depth than I think we have time now in these 2 minutes left. I think those are excellent questions. So my unwillingness to address them in these 2 minutes is actually because they require a more thoughtful response. And because now you are connected to all of us, I think that you might want to address that specifically to Susan or Ann or Eddie or me afterwards, so we can go more in depth about that conversation. I'm going to pass it back to Andy to wrap things up. We have 1 minute left, and I'm so grateful for everyone's time.
And Eddie, maybe I would add, if there is another resource from the Foundation for Social Connection related to that question, we can include that in the follow-up email as well.
So we do have one for workplace, and we're happy to send that out. So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So Eddie, thank you so much. Eddie Garcia, Foundation for Social Connection. Ann Shoket, thank you so much. Susan McPherson, Allison Gilbert, our co-hosts, Social Prescribing USA and the Foundation for Social Connection. Thank you for joining us. And thank you. There were some questions we didn't get to, and I appreciated that in the Zoom chat, folks were helping out each other in there to answer some of those questions. And thank you for those who already donated to Reimagine. When you registered, you can still support Reimagine's efforts to provide free, accessible, and engaging events like this one. please complete our survey. Trina is going to post that link in the chat now. If you can get that going, we really want to hear from you. We want to improve the programs that we're delivering to you. So please fill out that survey and join us for next month's session of Making Connections. It's all about forecasting in 2025. There was a question in the chat we didn't have time to get to on the results of this election and how that's going to impact social isolation and loneliness. So please join us for that. We've got the Aspen Institute's Fred Riley, who leads an initiative called Weave. So please join us for that. And we have journalist Julia Hotz, who has this fabulous book out now on social prescribing. It's something that we touched on earlier with Making Connections. When you go to your doctor or your nurse practitioner, maybe you can get a dose of doing an act of service. Maybe you can get a dose of going to a museum. Maybe you can get a dose of going to a nature center. Come learn about that. Trina's pasting the link in the chat. And that's it for Making Connections. It's 2:00. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much. Bye.